And,
Right.
Yes, it could be a knee-jerk reaction to blame mental illness for this, but, and this is a big but, we have to look at the environmental issues of, and I don't mean that as far as the kooks that think that
global warming is causing mass shootings.
Faith, firearms, and freedom. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 367. I just about sold myself short 100 episodes there. Episode 367. Thank you for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. Glad to be with you again. For those of you who are new, welcome aboard. Hope you enjoy what you hear, and we'll come back for more next week. Maybe go to the website, peruse all of the awesome exclusive content that we have there. Years of good stuff just waiting to be discovered. So thank you for being here. I am running solo again this week. Just a crazy week at work, and didn't really get a chance to set anything up. I've got something in mind for our next get-together with Pastor Bennett, but that is not happening this week. This week, before I get into what I wanted to discuss, I do want to give a shout-out to the awesome men and women who make this show possible. The men and women who are members of what we call the Reformation Gun Club. And this week's shout-out goes to Dan from Indian Trail, North Carolina, George from Hammond, Louisiana, Mark from St. Paul, Minnesota, Matthew from Nixa, Missouri, Paul from Sheridan, Wyoming, Kurt from Rialto, California, Ethan from Auburn, Indiana, Brian, probably our longest-serving supporter, Brian from Riverton, Wyoming, Paul from McKinney, Texas, and our newest member, Ty from Sarasota, Florida. Thank you all so much for your support, and thank you to all of the members of the Reformation Gun Club for everything you do to help us keep the lights on here at Armed Lutheran Radio. Folks, if you would like to find out how you can support the show and what all the benefits are, check out armedlutheran.us/gun club. Membership starts at just $15.17 per year. You get access to all of the exclusive content on the website, which includes hundreds of hours of exclusive content, plus some cool Armed Lutheran swag depending on the membership level you choose, and invitations to our monthly online hangouts, another of which will be coming up here in the next couple of weeks. Those are always fun time to hang out with the cast and with other members of the gun club. So be sure to check it out, armedlutheran.us/gun club. All right, this week I did want to talk about some recent gun news. Of course, we celebrated the 4th of July holiday here in the States, at least those of us who are not ashamed of to be an American. As I've said many times in recent weeks and months, going way back to the last year, our nation is now so bitterly divided. The left, at its extremes especially, hates the country and wants to tear everything down and build some kind of leftist utopia, a utopia where only certain kinds of speech is protected, religion is limited or abolished, and your children are groomed to view self-identity, self-satisfaction, and self-pleasure as the most important virtue, where guns are banned except for those that the government's allowed to have, and of course, criminals like Trump are locked away while gangbangers, crackheads, and sex traffickers, like the president's son, are excused because of their connections or the color of their skin or their sexual orientation. So it was an odd thing, of course, to hear leftists talk about the 4th Mostly they talked about the violence that took place across the country over the holiday in places like Philadelphia and Baltimore and Chicago, as always, and Fort Worth and other places. Interesting that when some white tweaker shoots up a school or a Walmart in El Paso, for example, we have a lengthy discussion about white supremacy and how racial minorities are in danger from us dangerous white folks, how racist America is. But when a Black Lives Matter supporter who dresses up like a woman shoots up a street in Philadelphia, let's focus on the guns. President Biden took a break from watching Matlock and eating tapioca to stumble out to the podium and make a statement about gun violence on the 4th. Quote, "Over the last few days, our nation has once again endured a wave of tragic and senseless shootings in communities across America, from Philadelphia to Fort Worth, Baltimore to Lansing, Wichita to Chicago. In the year since the Highland Park parade shooting, the president noted that Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker and Highland Park Mayor Nancy Roddering and gun violence survivors had, quote-unquote, fought tirelessly to secure a statewide ban on assault weapons in Illinois, which became law in January. The president said, quote, their achievement will save lives. But wait, it's July, not January. It's July. So this law has been in effect for 7 months. So how exactly is that law saving lives if we're continuing to see killings in Chicago every weekend and again over the 4th of July weekend? And the president went on, quote, as we've seen over the last few days, much more must be done in Illinois and across America to address the epidemic of gun violence that is tearing our communities apart. See, there's the catch. Nothing that lawmakers do to restrict law-abiding citizens, and that's exactly what they've proposed, and that's exactly what they've put into place in Illinois, and more specifically in Chicago. None of those laws actually affect criminals. They don't actually affect crime. So when their gun control measures fail, the solution is to come out and say there's more that we need to do. We need more gun control. Biden called on other states to follow Illinois' lead, as well as Republican lawmakers in Congress to agree to what he described as, quote, and this is the catchphrase, common sense reforms. Ask yourself when you hear that term, common sense reforms, whose common sense are we talking about? Are we talking about the common sense of brain-addled politicians like Joe Biden, or are we talking about actual common sense? Because common sense says that if you want to stop crime, you focus on criminals, not on law-abiding citizens. But I digress. Quote, it is within our power to once again ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, to require safe storage of guns, and to end gun manufacturers' immunity from liability, and to enact universal background checks. Now, how would any of those things have prevented the killings that we saw over the holiday? Now, I'm not going to address the safe storage issue. I'm not going to address the liability issue, which is moronic and unconstitutional. The idea that you can sue the manufacturer of a product for the misuse of its product. And I'm going to ignore the universal background checks, which are stupid, because the only way universal background checks actually works is if you have Big Brother watching you 24/7, which I'm sure the left would like to have the power to do. But since we're not there yet, I'm not going to address that. I want to look at this idea that if we simply ban assault weapons, that we would be safer. So how would banning assault weapons have prevented the killings we saw over the holiday? Here's a headline from Baltimore. Teen charged in connection with Baltimore block party shooting. Oh no, a teenager? You mean a 17-year-old kid who is already not allowed to own guns? And he can't own handguns or long guns. Remember, we had the big conversation not too long ago during the last brouhaha after Uvalde over raising the age limit to buy firearms. Well, it wouldn't matter what the age limit was because this kid isn't allowed to possess firearms now anywhere in the country. But how can that be? I thought those sorts of laws, I thought the limiting the age, the age that someone can possess a firearm, I thought that would keep people safe. Oh, apparently not. From the article this was at msn.com, or was maybe the New York Post. I'm not sure which, one or the other. The suspect, whom the Baltimore Police Department did not name, is being charged with possession of a firearm by a minor, assault weapon possession, reckless endangerment, and handgun in vehicle, the department said in a statement. Possession of a firearm by a minor. So it's already illegal for a teenager to possess a firearm, and that didn't stop him. Assault weapon possession. You mean it's already illegal for someone to possess a so-called assault weapon in Baltimore, and that didn't stop him? Handgun in a vehicle? It's illegal in Baltimore to have a handgun in your vehicle, and that didn't stop him? Why, it's almost like criminals don't obey the law. Who'd have thought? So Biden wants to ban assault weapons, quote unquote, but they're already banned in Baltimore. They're already banned in Illinois, where another spate of shootings took place. So if the bans in Baltimore and Chicago, which is part and Illinois statewide, if those didn't make a difference over the holiday weekend, how is a national ban going to make a difference? And the clear answer is that it won't, because criminals don't care about your laws. That's why by definition, they're criminals. The Clinton-era ban that Biden loves to brag about so much did not stop mass shootings. So he's had to alter his claim to suggest that mass shootings spiked after the ban sunset. But you got to remember that when we banned assault weapons in 94, I believe it was, the Clinton assault weapons ban went into effect, I think, in September of 94. It was 4 years later we had Columbine. I was looking at the numbers. In 94, we had 5 so-called mass shootings. And I got these numbers from a collection online. Of course, if you listen to the Violence Policy Center or whatever, the Gun Violence Archive, they'll try to tell you that we have 600 so-called mass shootings a year. That's all BS, because that's including all the gang-related violence that happens in our inner cities like Chicago every single weekend. Those are not classically mass shootings. What you consider a mass shooting has been, the definition's been altered in order to boost the numbers. In reality, if you go back to the 1990s when this all started to percolate originally, I'm not sure what the kicker was. I think it was probably the Luby's massacre in Killeen, Texas in 1991. That year there were 6 mass shootings and 49 deaths. In 93, there were 7 and 35 deaths. But there have been bigger ones since. Of course, we've had Parkland. Of course, we had Las Vegas. We had the Sutherland Springs incident. We've had Uvalde, right? So the question is, and the guns haven't changed. They haven't gotten more deadly. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, what has changed? And I think the clear answer is that society's changing, and not in a good way. So if you look during the years of the ban, where we came out of the years before the ban with 3, 6, 4, 7 mass shootings in the 3-4 years before the ban went into effect. Well, from 94 through 2003, we have 5, 4, 2, 5, 5, 7, 7, 2, 2, 6. The final year of the ban, there were 6 and 19 people killed. And during that time, we had Columbine. That was in 1999, actually. I think I said 98 earlier. My mistake. So banning assault weapons didn't stop people from killing each other in mass shootings. And of course, the listing that I found didn't actually stipulate the kind of firearm. I didn't go into that level of detail. The point is that violence continued throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. We had already, leading into the 94 assault weapons ban, had seen a decline in violent crime going into the 90s and proceeding through that era when the assault weapons ban went into effect. So figuring out whether or not the assault weapons ban actually had an effect is a little dubious. And studies have shown that you can't successfully claim that we've had that many mass shootings, or that mass shootings and violent crime were affected by the assault weapons ban. Now, what has changed since one of the things that the left wants to try to suggest is that the rise in violence, that the rise in mass shootings since the sunset of the assault weapons ban is because the ban is no longer there. But it ignores all the other factors. It ignores the continuing dissolution of the family. It ignores the coddling of criminals that we constantly see throughout the country. We have seen over and over excuses made for violent crime and more chances given to people simply because of the color of their skin. Leftist, Soros-backed district attorneys are the worst for this sort of thing. And let's not forget the summer of love that was the Black Lives Matter riots and burnings and killings that took place during the Trump administration, that was basically overlooked and allowed to continue simply because they wanted to make a political opponent look bad. Now let's look at some of these. If you remember back in I think it was episode 274, I looked it up and I jotted this down. If the narrative doesn't fit, then they change the narrative, right? So we're continuing to see this. The shooter in El Paso Walmart was a white supremacist. We had to focus on white supremacy. Yeah, I bring him up again because just this past week, he was given 90 life sentences. The shooter in the Charleston church back a decade ago, white supremacists, so let's focus on racists and all Southerners. The shooter in Parkland, Florida was a white kid, so we got to focus on the dangers of young white men. The shooter from the El Paso Walmart that I just mentioned, getting 90 life sentences this week, and his face and his name plastered across every news outlet in America again, when we should be erasing him from our memory. The shooter in Baltimore, though, a black teenager who was already breaking a dozen laws, not counting the assault and the murder, well, we got to focus on the guns. The shooter in Philadelphia is a mentally ill trans man. That is a man, and he's black too, so don't forget that. A black mentally ill trans man. That's a woman, that's a man who dresses in women's clothing, and he's also, turns out, a big supporter of Black Lives Matter. We can't focus on that. Let's focus on the guns. Shooters in Fort Worth, the Fort Worth incidents that were mentioned earlier, that was a block party. Young black men, gang-related. That doesn't fit the narrative, so let's focus on the guns. Shooters in Chicago. As always, young black men, gang-related. Focus on the guns. The violence is simply a means to an end. The left, people like Joe Biden, this may seem crass, but I don't think I'm wrong on this. Joe Biden doesn't give a damn if a bunch of black people get killed in the streets, as long as they can use them to push gun control. They don't care about kids getting killed in schools, as long as they can use it to push gun control. They don't care about the violence, the weekly violence on the streets of our inner cities, because they know that the black vote is going to blindly follow them and vote for them every election, no matter what. So they're going to pander to inner city black communities as if they care about the petty criminals, drug dealers, and gangbangers that keep killing people every weekend. They only care about power and the money that they can get from taking these positions, from the anti-gun lobby, I should say, groups like Bloomberg, groups like Giffords. They know if they suddenly turn pro-gun, or at the very least changed their stance, didn't focus so much on guns, but focused instead on crime and getting tough on crime, they know the gun lobby and gun owners are not suddenly going to start filling their campaign coffers or voting for them. So it's profitable for them to continue down this path, to demonize guns and not criminals, to demonize white people and not black criminals. Now, you're probably wondering how I can say this. Shouldn't I be more charitable and put the best construction on everything, as the Catechism says in the explanation of the Eighth Commandment? Well, consider this. The politicians who constantly call for gun control never seek to solve actual problems. They're only looking for cheap, easy solutions like banning inanimate objects. To stop crime, logically, the common sense thing to do would be to focus on criminals, put them in jail, lock them away for years so that they can't hurt other people, put them to death if they're mass shooters, mass killers, not give them 90 life sentences, which the taxpayers have to pay to support, or if they're a child molester, you put them down. But the left doesn't do that, because, well, they will complain about the horrors and evils of the death penalty. They've got no problem with the death penalty when it comes to the unborn. The vast majority of murders in this country are committed by minorities. That's not because they are minorities. This is not a race issue. It just so happens that this is a statistical fact. The vast majority of victims also happen to be minorities. Minorities that the left has worked for years to convince that they are being systematically discriminated against. By the system, by the police, by the justice system, whatever, by the courts. So Joe Biden can't call for tougher laws or more police or harsher sentences because he needs minority voters to continue to blindly vote Democrat. And after years of complaining about racist police and systemic racism, the left can't suddenly change course and call for, as Bill Clinton did in the 1990s, call for the hiring of more police or increasing the funding for them or calling for tougher sentences. That's what Bill Clinton did in the 1990s. Can't do that now. It's easier to pander to the gun control lobby and gripe about guns and white people than it is to actually fight crime, where the crime primarily happens, which is in our inner cities, in our black communities run by Democrats, because you run the risk of alienating your core voters. That way, you can continue to blather on about systemic racism and the bogeyman of right-wing violence against minorities and perverts, and continue to expect those people in those communities to support you and to show up at the ballot box. Bottom line is that politics sucks. It's awful. What's the old saying that politics is basically Hollywood for ugly people? Well, that's about right. It's a terrible way to solve real problems, because the only problem that politicians really care about is themselves. All right, that's what was on my mind this week. If you have any thoughts or comments or questions, please visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a message. We'd love to hear from you and respond in a future episode. If you have any suggestions for topics or anything that you would like us to discuss on the show, please leave a message for us there. We would love to hear it. Be sure to tune in again next week for episode 368. Hopefully we'll be able to get a Clinging to God and Guns episode in with Pastor Bennett. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.